A son who sells his father's light should expect a storm. I didn't raise my voice. I thumbed the brass anchor at my throat and watched the gallery window swallow the last of Hudson's gray light. 68 years behind me. The bones creak, sure, but the keel holds. Liam stood between the frames like a realtor, not a son. His wife smiled the way people do when papers are ready. "Dad, your era's over," he said, crisp as a gallery label. "We've moved everything into a new art fund. Protection, growth, legacy." He let the word hang like a price tag turned face out. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. I listened to the office clock clicking like a metronome for bad news. The air smelled of linseed and old rope. A dehumidifier hummed like a distant engine room. On the wall, a schooner's white sails flashed under varnish. Wind caught forever. Liam touched that frame as if blessing it, already counting futures it would buy him. "Paperwork's in order," his wife said, laying a folder on my desk. "You'll be honorary founder, of course." Her perfume cut through the room, citrus over salt. Honorary. A word with nothing inside. I've stood watch on water black, as a closed pupil. I know what storms do. They show what a hull is made of. So I nodded and asked Liam to pour us 3 coffees. He brightened. He always took calm for surrender. He didn't notice my thumb trace the nick on the anchor pendant, earned in a squall when the Atlantic wanted me more than the ship did. While he rattled cups, I leafed the papers. Art Fund, LLC. Fresh ink, brisk signatures. The gallery I built from pawn shop frames and night shifts now belonged to a shell with a handsome logo. They'd use me like a lighthouse, borrow the beam, then call it obsolete. "Look at the upside," Liam said, sliding a mug my way. "You get recognition without the headaches. We'll take the brand national." The coffee was hot and thin. I let it burn just to feel something clean. "Legacy," I repeated. The clock ticked. The dehumidifier hummed. Up in the attic, a pipe clanged like a bell buoy in fog. I signed nothing. I said less. Old men talk too much about the weather. Sailors don't. I walked the walls, each canvas a latitude. Storm survived, ports forgiven, debts repaid. Liam followed, naming artists, markets, auctions, as if a tide could be priced. At the end, we stopped before the schooner. "Centerpiece," he said. "It anchors the whole collection. Anchors hold, or they cut." I looked at the pendant, then the painting, then my son. The room had gone so quiet I could hear the paint dry. I said, "If that's true, we'd better test the chain." Liam blinked, eager and certain. He didn't see the tide turn beneath him. I stepped behind the desk, opened the bottom drawer, and slid out the velvet pouch I hadn't touched in 20 years. The pouch was heavier than memory. The clasp clicked like a trigger. Inside was the first piece of storm. The velvet pouch lay on the desk like a sealed horizon. Liam didn't ask what was inside. He was too busy admiring his reflection in the schooner's glass. That's the thing about confidence. It blinds a man faster than smoke in a storm. I loosened the drawstring and felt the cool edges of old photographs, bills of sale, scraps of letters with ink that smelled faintly of salt and mildew. Not treasures, not yet, just ballast waiting to be shifted. My anchor pendant rested on top, brass dull by years but steady in my palm. "You never told me what you keep in there," Liam said lightly, still half turned toward the canvas. He wasn't looking at me, only at what he thought he owned. "Things worth holding," I murmured. I closed the pouch again, tucked it into my coat, and looked him square in the eye. He saw only patience. He never learned that patience is just silence with teeth. That night, I walked the long blocks back to my apartment. The city had the sour smell of rain on concrete, of steam rising from manhole covers. I heard the subway grumble beneath my feet like a distant tide. My gallery's lights faded behind me, replaced by neon bars and the sad glow of laundromats. Each step pressed the truth deeper. My son had sold not just walls and paintings, but the years I bled into them. At home, I spread the contents of the pouch across the table. There were catalogs from auctions decades past, one with my margin notes about a forged signature. There were letters from a critic who once confessed doubts about masterpieces later praised. Seeds of doubt, waiting for the right soil. I smiled, not with joy, but with the grim calm of a helmsman setting course in fog. I poured whiskey, let it cut down my throat like a line taut with storm weight. Across from me hung a faded map of the Atlantic I bought for 50 cents in 1972. Every port I'd ever known was a dot on that paper sea. Some men chased fortune. I had chased horizons. Now horizon and fortune would meet again on my terms. My plan began not with fire or fury, but with ink. Tomorrow I'd make a call to an old friend at the Tribune, a man who owed me a favor. Just a whisper, a doubt slipped into the current. Liam Callahan's collection might not be as pure as advertised. The art world feeds on whispers. Rumors spread faster than tides. I leaned back, listening to the city's heartbeat through my window. Honks, sirens, laughter spilling from a late bar. I thought of Liam's certainty, the way he'd handled those papers like commandments carved in stone. The schooner in the gallery was his crown jewel, but even the finest sail tears if you catch it at the right angle. I closed my eyes and held the anchor pendant tight. The brass warmed in my fist, as if remembering every storm it had seen. Tomorrow the first wave would hit, and when it did, my son would learn the sea doesn't care how loud you boast on deck. The real test comes when the wind changes, sudden, sharp, and merciless. The call went through just after dawn. My old friend at the Tribune still answered his own phone, voice hoarse with too much coffee and too little sleep. We hadn't spoken in years, but sailors and newspapermen share one thing. Memory like a ledger. He owed me for a story I'd buried long ago, and I could hear the dead in his silence when I mentioned Liam's name. "I'm not asking you to print a lie," I said, staring at the rain streaking my window. "Just a question. Just enough to make the right people wonder." The line crackled, then a sigh. "You always were a stormbringer, Sanford." "Fine. I'll place a pebble in the water." By noon the whisper was afloat. On certain forums, in hushed gallery circles, a sentence began to repeat. "Is Callahan's collection as authentic as it seems?" That's all it took. The art world is a church built on doubt, faith in providence, in certificates, in a critic's trembling word. Once a seed of doubt is planted, even the strongest pillar begins to crack. I walked to the gallery that afternoon. From across the street, I watched Liam usher two men in sleek coats past the door, voices loud with salesmanship. His wife stood by the counter, posture sharp, her smile a blade. They didn't see me in the rain. Good. Storms are meant to arrive unseen. I stepped into the diner on the corner, ordered black coffee, and waited. By 3 o'clock, one of the men left in a hurry. Coat collar pulled high, phone pressed tight to his ear. By 5, Liam emerged, face pale, jaw tight, his wife trailing like smoke. I didn't need to hear their words. Their silence told enough. That night, headlines small as footnotes began to bloom. Questions raised about Callahan collection. No proof, no accusations, just a tremor. But tremors split mountains. I poured myself another drink and spread the old catalogs wider. My handwriting stared back at me. Notes about brushstrokes inconsistent with an artist period. Frames that didn't match the decade claimed. Each one a spark I could fan into flame. Still, beneath my calm there was ache, a father's ache. I remembered Liam at 12, eyes wide as he helped me hang our first painting, his small hand steady on the frame. When had that boy traded wonder for greed? I pressed the anchor pendant until it bit my palm, reminding me, storms don't ask why, they simply come. As the city lights flickered outside, I knew this was only the beginning. The wave had struck, but the tide was still turning. Tomorrow, there would be a bigger swell. Because once the rumor touched the auction block, once the first buyer pulled back his hand, the silence in that room would roar louder than any gale I'd ever faced. And Liam would be standing right at the center of it. The auction hall glittered like a cathedral of glass and velvet, chandeliers trembling with expectation. I sat 3 rows back, anonymous in a sea of black suits and jeweled wrists. The air smelled of perfume and polish, but beneath it, I caught the faintest tang of fear. Rumors had already done their work. Buyers spoke in half-whispers, glancing at the catalog as if it might stain their hands. At the podium, Liam looked every bit the prince he imagined himself to be. His tie sharp, his smile rehearsed, his gestures wide enough to command the room. His wife perched beside the front row, nodding at the right moments, encouraging his every word. She didn't notice the critic in the corner scribbling furiously, or the dealer whispering to another with a raised brow. The first lots moved, though slower than expected. Bids rose like reluctant tides, hands hesitating before lifting. Liam's jaw tightened, but he masked it with charm. When the schooner painting's turn came, the so-called centerpiece, he stepped forward as if to present a crown jewel. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "a rare piece, unmatched in provenance, an anchor to any collection." He paused, letting the silence build into anticipation. But silence is moods. This one was brittle, watchful. The bidding started modestly, then stalled. A hand rose, then withdrew. Another voice offered half-heartedly, but fell quiet when challenged. The auctioneer pressed, his gavel hovering like a gull uncertain where to land. And then, nothing. No bids. No takers. A painting that should have commanded the price of a small yacht hung in limbo, rejected. I saw it happen in Liam's face. The crack behind the smile, the sweat on his temple. His wife leaned forward, whispering something sharp enough to slice. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, sending blood in the water. The gavel came down, not with triumph, but with a dull thud of failure. Lot unsold. The words rang louder than any hammer. Whispers spread, ripples across the pews of this gilded church. "Questionable provenance," someone muttered. "No clear record." Another nodded. I could feel the tide turning, a riptide pulling Liam out to sea. I touched the anchor pendant at my throat, feeling the metal grow warm against my skin. He wanted legacy. I'd given him spectacle. This was the first real strike, public and undeniable. Liam stammered through the next lot, his voice trembling against the microphone. His wife's smile vanished, replaced with the frozen mask of someone calculating escape routes. Critics scribbled faster. Dealers avoided his eyes. I left before the auction ended. I didn't need to see more. The ship had already struck reef. The silence of that unsold canvas would echo louder than any headline. Outside, the night wind whipped down the avenue, cold and salt-edged. I pulled my coat tight and walked into it, steady as a man on deck. Behind me, the hull still glittered, but its lights now seemed faint, fragile against the coming storm. And in that moment, I knew this was only the second wave. The third would hit harder, much harder. Morning headlines came like gulls on carrion. Promising young dealer's auction falters. Uncertainty clouds Callahan collection. The Tribune ran only 2 paragraphs, but that was enough. In the art world, reputation doesn't bleed, it hemorrhages. I sat with my coffee at the corner diner, same cracked vinyl booth I'd haunted since the 70s. The waitress set the cup down without asking. She'd seen the fire in my eyes and knew better than to make small talk. I unfolded the paper slowly, savoring the ink smudge on my fingers, the smell of newsprint like salt air. Liam's name was there in black type, sharp as a harpoon. By noon, calls must have swarmed his office. I imagined him snapping at assistants, jaw tight, hands shaking as he scrolled through messages. The art fund he'd built on smoke and mirrors was showing its seams. And seams split faster when damp with doubt. That afternoon, I visited an old contact at a midtown gallery, a woman with iron gray hair and eyes that could slice canvas in two. She remembered me from my sailor days, when I hauled crates to the docks and traded stories for coffee. "He's your boy, isn't he?" she asked, tapping the newspaper. I nodded. Blood's no armor against pride. She smirked, sliding a catalog across the desk. "Then let pride sink him. I'll pass the word along, quietly." The word spread faster than tide through marsh reeds. By evening, 3 critics had posted vague remarks about inconsistencies in provenance. Collectors who once bragged of Liam's pieces now spoke cautiously, disclaimers tacked to their pride. It might not be what we thought. Doubt had grown teeth. I walked the galleries at dusk, unseen among the patrons. Overheard snippets painted the picture better than ink. I hear some works aren't traceable. Wasn't one already rejected at auction? Faces lean close, eyes darting like fish in shallows. And Liam? He tried to patch the leaks. Sent emails, arranged dinners, promised access to exclusive finds. But every promise sounded louder against the hollow echo of that unsold schooner. His wife's laughter grew thinner too, brittle under the weight of whispers. Back home, I opened the pouch again. Spread my old notes, photographs, letters. My hand lingered on one in particular, a critic's admission from decades back, confessing he'd vouched for a forged signature to keep a gallery afloat. That letter would be my next wave. Once released, it would tie doubt to scandal. I leaned back in my chair, pendant heavy against my chest. The schooner painting stared from memory, its sails frozen windless. Liam thought it anchored his triumph. He never saw the anchor was rusted through. I drained the last of my whiskey and smiled, not out of joy, but recognition. The sea was rising, the current strong, and the next tide would not simply rock his ship. It would roll it. The letter was my harpoon, sharp and patient. Yellowed paper, faint creases where anxious fingers had once folded it too quickly. A critic's private confession. He'd vouched for a forged signature to keep a gallery's doors open. I'd held it for decades, not as a weapon then, but as proof that truth always surfaces, eventually. Now, in Liam's world of prestige and champagne promises, it would cut deeper than any blade. I scanned it, typed only a fragment. Careful as a surgeon, past assurances of authenticity in Callahan's orbit have long been questioned. No names, no dates, just enough smoke to make fire believable. I sent it to 3 critics I knew still trusted my silence. And then I waited. Waiting is an art. Sailors know this. The sea tests patience more than strength. You watch clouds gather, hear the pitch of the wind change, smell the storm before you ever see its waves. I waited in the gallery's shadow, leaning on the cold stone facade, while inside, Liam hosted a private viewing. Laughter spilled to the windows, glasses clinking like false bells. But beneath it I caught nervous notes, 2 loud greetings, 2 quick sips. An hour later, the first critic left. His eyes avoided Liam's. Another followed, lips pressed thin, not bothering with goodbyes. I knew then the letter had landed. Inside, Liam's smile would be cracking like cheap porcelain. The next morning, the city woke to sharper words. Provenance shadows lengthened over Callahan collection. Doubts mount as questions remain unanswered. One piece even printed my fragment verbatim, bolded for weight. They didn't need proof. In art, suggestion is enough to rot the frame. By midday, I walked past a cafe where dealers and collectors often gathered. Through the window, I saw Liam at a corner table, his wife hissing in his ear. He gestured wildly, voice raised, but the room around them buzzed with its own hum, no longer revolving around him. Heads turned not with admiration but with curiosity, pity, and worse, dismissal. That was the second public wound, sharper than the auction. Critics were no longer silent allies. They had become accusers without lifting a finger. For Liam, the stage lights dimmed, leaving him under a harsher glow. Exposure. I touched the anchor pendant, its weight steady against my chest. A storm isn't just thunder and waves. It's a slow flood that seeps through the hull, turning strong timbers soft. Liam's timbers were softening, fast. That night, I walked the pier. The Hudson was black glass, reflecting only shards of light. I thought of Liam at 12 again, skipping stones, asking if ships ever lost their way. I told him then, a ship only drifts if the captain closes his eyes. Now, my son's eyes were wide open, staring into a fog of his own making. And tomorrow, I would make sure he tasted the cold spray of it, full in the face. The third blow came faster than even I expected. Scandals move like storms once they catch the wind. First whispers, then gusts, then a gale that tears canvas and snaps masts. Liam had been scrambling to patch holes, but that morning the largest gallery in Chelsea released a statement. They would no longer represent him. I read the words twice over coffee. They were polite, clinical, the way a captain logs a man lost overboard. In light of recent uncertainties regarding provenance, we have chosen to discontinue our partnership with Mr. Callahan. That was it. No anger, no defense. Just distance. Silence heavier than condemnation. By noon, the news had spread to every corner of the art world. Clients who once bragged about owning a Callahan piece now avoided his calls. Even his so-called friends, the ones who toasted him with champagne and leaned close for photographs, suddenly had other dinners to attend. Reputation doesn't die loudly. It dies in absence. The invitations stop. The seats grow empty. The spotlight shifts elsewhere. I follow from the edges. A sailor knows you don't always need to fight the storm head-on. Sometimes you let it drive the ship where you want it to go. Liam was drifting exactly where I steered him, out of favor, into the undertow. That evening, I saw him step out of a black car on Madison, headed to a gallery opening that had once begged for his presence. He straightened his tie, his wife beside him like polished armor. But the crowd at the door parted strangely, not to welcome, but to avoid. Smiles faltered, hands slipped into pockets, eyes darted away. They entered not as royalty, but as outcasts. Inside, whispers grew. A critic brushed past without greeting him. An old investor laughed too loudly at another man's joke, deliberately turning his back. Liam stood stranded in the middle of the room, still smiling, still pretending the wind hadn't shifted. His wife's hand tightened on his arm, nails digging deep. I left before he saw me. I didn't need his eyes to confirm what I already knew. Humiliation tastes bitterest when served cold and in company. That was the third public strike, the one that stripped away his sheen. Back home, I sat in the quiet, anchor pendant pressed against my chest. The pouch lay open on the table, documents spread like navigation charts. I traced the lines of each one, routes plotted years before, but never sailed until now. Every step had brought him closer to the reef, and he had steered himself onto it without once suspecting I held the compass. Yet as the city settled into night, I felt something unexpected stir beneath the calm. Not triumph, but weight. A father watching his son sink still feels the cold water rising. My chest ached with it, the way ribs ache in old storms. Still, storms do not pause for grief. They finish what they start. And the tide had not yet finished with Liam Callahan. I found him 2 nights later at the bar of the Warwick Hotel, a place he once called his office away from office. In those days, waiters hurried with his order before he spoke, and collectors angled for his attention like gulls over bread. Now he sat alone, hunched, nursing a glass of bourbon that was more water than fire. His tie was loosened, his smile gone. I slid into a booth in the shadows, where I could see him without being seen. The bar's low lights made every face look like it carried secrets, but Liam's face carried something heavier, fear. He checked his phone over and over, thumbs twitching, waiting for a call that never came. Across the room, 2 critics entered, men he once courted like kings. They spotted him, smirked, then deliberately chose seats at the far end. Liam rose, half hopeful, half desperate, but they turned their backs before he could speak. That silence was louder than any insult. His wife arrived a half hour later, heels clicking sharp against the floor. She didn't sit close. She didn't kiss his cheek. She ordered champagne, and when the waiter asked if it was a celebration, she laughed, short, bitter, cutting. Celebration? Hardly. The whole bar heard it. Liam's ears reddened. He tried to shush her, but she leaned in, voice like a blade. You promised me a throne. You've given me a sinking raft. I watched his jaw tighten, his hands clench on the glass until his knuckles bleached. A man can weather insults from strangers, but not from the person meant to be his anchor. That night, his wife became the storm against him. She left before finishing her drink, coat swinging like a final word. He sat alone, broken open for all to see. The humiliation wasn't mine to deliver. It came from within his own camp. Yet it struck harder than any rumor or article. Even the bartender avoided his eyes, sliding the bill across with a pitying glance. The king of Madison Avenue, reduced to a man who couldn't pay the check without fumbling. I walked out before he noticed me, the cool night slapping my face with the scent of rain. My anchor pendant was warm against my chest. Every wave I'd summoned had crashed perfectly, each one timed to strip him bare. But this collapsed inside his marriage. It was a wound deeper than I had planned. Back in my apartment, I laid the pouch on the table again. Inside was still the final strike, the masterpiece I had held in reserve. But as I stared at the velvet, I felt a strange tug in my chest. I remembered him as a boy on that same bar stool years ago, sipping cola, asking if someday the world would respect him like it respected me. Now the world respected neither. It mocked him openly, and it waited for my final blow. I closed the pouch, fingers trembling not with age but with the weight of choice. The storm was near its eye, and tomorrow, the calm before the last surge would arrive. He didn't see me when I walked into the gallery that afternoon. How could he? His head was bowed, his shoulders rounded, the shine of his tailored suit dulled by sweat. The gallery no longer belonged to him. His name had been scrubbed from the letterhead. His wife had moved out, and the staff whispered when he passed. Yet there he stood, as if haunting the very halls he once ruled. I paused in the doorway, taking in the sight. Where once champagne had flowed and critics had clapped him on the back, now silence clung to the air. Dust gathered in corners. Paintings leaned half unhung like abandoned sails. My son, the self-made captain of an empire, was now just another ghost in the room. And then came the blow that turned whispers into laughter. The director of the art center, a man younger than Liam by 20 years, strode in with 2 guards. "We'll need you at security desk," he said curtly. Liam blinked, confused, as though the words were foreign. "Security? You can't be serious." His voice cracked, brittle as porcelain. The director handed him a blazer 2 sizes too big, with a badge stitched at the chest. "You want a paycheck, don't you?" A hush fell over the staff gathered nearby. They didn't dare laugh, not out loud, but their eyes glimmered with a cruel satisfaction. Liam hesitated, then slipped the blazer on. It swallowed him whole, stripped him of what little dignity remained. I stepped back into the shadows, unseen, my anchor pennant burning against my chest. This was the third and cruelest public humiliation. My son, reduced to a guard in the gallery he once commanded. The same marble floors where he hosted collectors were now floors he'd pace in silence, watching others admire art he no longer claimed. I left before he could sense me, walking into the cool evening. Each step felt heavy. I had charted this course, wave after wave, until the ship broke apart. And now he drifted, alone, clinging to a plank of what had once been his pride. Back in my apartment, I poured whiskey into a chipped mug. The city's hum pressed through the walls, indifferent and eternal. I spread the documents once more, the forged catalogs, the letters, the proofs of deceit. The final masterpiece lay ready. All it would take was one unveiling, one sharp pull of the curtain, and Liam would be sunk for good. But staring at those papers, I remembered him at 8 years old, standing guard at this very gallery's door during an opening. He'd insisted on it, chest puffed, proud to be the watchman. Guests had smiled, calling him loyal, a little sentinel protecting his father's dream. Now he truly was a watchman, but stripped of pride, mocked in silence, a man undone. The storm was almost spent, but the sea hadn't finished with him, and neither had I. The night of a new exhibition arrived with all the ceremony of a coronation. Flashbulbs popped outside the museum. Cars purred up the curb, and the crowd poured in critics, collectors, patrons draped in silk and expectation. I walked among them unnoticed, another gray-haired man in a sea of black coats. They didn't see the storm tethered to my chest, the brass anchor heavy against my heart. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of fresh paint and polished marble. Strings played softly from a corner, drowned now and then by laughter that was just a little too sharp, a little too eager. At the center of it all, the canvas they called the crown. Liam's prize, his supposed masterpiece, the painting that had elevated him, the one he paraded like a flag at every battle for prestige. But tonight, the flag would burn. I kept to the edges, watching him circle the room. His blazer was gone, replaced by borrowed dignity, a tailored suit, pressed and starched, but his eyes betrayed the truth. Hollow, red-rimmed, his wife was absent, no ring on his finger now. Alone, he clung to conversations that slipped through his hands like water. A critic turned away mid-sentence. A collector smiled thinly, then drifted off without shaking his hand. He stood marooned in his own kingdom. I waited until the speeches began. The director raised a glass, spoke of visionaries and pillars of art, words that once might have gilded Liam's name. Now, they slid past him entirely. He applauded along with the rest, pretending not to notice. Then the curtain fell away from the crown. Gasps filled the hall. Cameras flashed. The painting glowed beneath the lights, brushstrokes rich, colors alive. For a moment, I saw him swell again, shoulders back, chin lifted, a ghost of the man he believed himself to be. He expected applause. He expected salvation. But salvation was never coming, because the crown was not what they thought, not what he thought. It was my hand that had touched it last, my eye that had chosen the frame, the signature, the cracks and varnish placed too deliberately, a forgery dressed in its own finery. I stood still as the tide rose around me. The critics leaned in closer, voices murmuring, already questioning, already doubting. Liam's smile flickered, unsure. He sensed it, the shift, the scent of blood in the water. The anchor in my palm pulsed warm, steady as a heartbeat. I knew what came next, and when I stepped forward, clear in my throat, every head turned, the hall hushed. Liam froze, and with my first word, the keel of his last ship would crack. The microphone felt strange in my hand, like a tiller seized after years ashore. The crowd parted in silence, and all their eyes found me, a gray figure stepping from the shadows. Liam's face blanched, his mouth half open, like a boy caught with stolen bread. I built this gallery on tides and storms. I began, my voice carrying low but steady. On nights when ships barely held together, I learned the truth. A vessel without integrity will sink, no matter how fine it sails. The words cut through the hush. A few chuckles of discomfort, a cough, the rustle of programs. Liam tried to interject, but his throat betrayed him, strangling his voice. I gestured toward the painting, the crown. You look at this canvas and see triumph. But art does not forgive deceit, and neither do the sea or time. Murmurs rose like wind before squall. A critic pushed closer, notebook ready. Cameras shifted, capturing not the canvas now, but me. I reached into my coat and drew out the velvet pouch, heavy with years. Gasps whispered through the hall. Liam staggered forward, eyes wide, whispering, pleading, but too softly for anyone to hear. I opened the pouch slowly, deliberately. Letters, catalogs, photographs spilled onto the podium like flotsam from a wreck. My hand rested on the anchor pendant, gleaming under the lights. This, I said, raising one document, is proof the collection you've been sold, the reputation you've praised, was built on forgery. The audience erupted. Voices tangled, shock, outrage, disbelief. Flashbulbs fired like lightning. Liam lunged, snatching at the papers, but the director caught his arm, eyes cold, grip iron. This is a lie. Liam shouted, his voice breaking at last. But no one believed him. Not now. Not with the evidence spread like open wounds. Not with the storm already surging. I leaned closer to the microphone, eyes fixed on him. You wanted a legacy, but a legacy cannot be forged. A man who builds his name on deceit becomes a forgery himself. The hall thundered with whispers, with judgment. Liam stumbled back, pale and shaking, surrounded not by admirers but by skeptics, accusers, vultures circling the wreck. And in the chaos, I saw the moment break him. His hands trembled, his lips quivered, his gaze darted, searching for rescue that would never come. I closed the pouch, slipped it back into my coat. The anchor pendant pressed warm against my chest, steady as a heartbeat of sea. The storm had broken open, and my son was drowning in its flood. But the tide was not yet done with him. No, the cruelest wave was still to come. The hall was a tempest now. Collectors who once fought to shake Liam's hand recoiled as though his touch might stain. Critics circled like sharks, their pens flashing, questions fired with the sharpness of harpoons. How long have you known? Who authenticated this? Were the rumors true all along? Liam stammered, sweating through his perfect suit. Lies, he rasped, voice thin. All lies. But the words clanged hollow, like a cracked bell tolling in fog. His denial was drowned out by the rising tide of voices, the scrape of chairs, the bitter laughter of men who had once envied him. I watched him falter under the weight of it, and for a moment I almost pitied him. Almost. But storms don't pause for pity. They strip, they break, they lay bare. The director of the museum stepped forward, his tone cold and surgical. "Mr. Callahan, until this matter is resolved, your work will be withdrawn, effective immediately." His words rang louder than the gavel at that failed auction, final and merciless. Liam's face collapsed. He staggered back a step, his hands fluttering uselessly, searching for some defense, some ally. But there were none. Even his wife had abandoned him. The empty space at his side was louder than any insult. I moved closer, through the crowd that parted from me, their whispers trailing in my wake. I stopped just a few feet from him. His eyes found mine, rage, fear, and something smaller, more brittle, recognition. "You," he hissed, trembling. "You did this." I let the silence answer for me. Then I spoke low, for his ears or the microphone still carried my voice. "The sea tests a ship by its weakest seam. You are all seam, Liam. No keel, no ballast, only canvas and paint." The crowd devoured the words, their judgment now unanimous. Liam clutched at the podium, pale as bone, his lips trembling. A man stripped to the core, undone not by strangers, but by the truth laid bare. I turned from him then, letting the storm consume what remained. The cameras flashed, not on him, not on the crown, but on me, the old sailor with an anchor around his neck, the man who had dragged deceit into the light. Yet as I walked toward the exit, each step echoed heavy. This wasn't triumph. Not yet. The sea had claimed his reputation, his pride, his marriage. But one thing remained, his last illusion, the belief that even in ruin he might claw his way back. That illusion, too, would have to shatter, and I carried the shard of glass that would do it. The city didn't sleep that night, not for Liam. By dawn, his name was ash on every tongue. Papers called him a fallen prodigy. Anchors on morning shows dissected his disgrace with smug precision. Even the blogs that once courted him now spit headlines like poisoned darts. Forgery at the heart of Callahan Empire. His face, pale and broken from the exhibition, replayed again and again across screens. I watched from my kitchen table, the anchor pendant heavy in my palm. Outside, the Hudson rolled slow and dark, carrying with it the echo of storms past. I poured coffee black as tar, let it burn down my throat, and thought, he had wanted the world to know his name. Now it did, just not the way he planned. By afternoon, I walked past the museum. There he was, hunched at the security desk, the blazer hanging loose from his shoulders, a badge glinting dimly under fluorescent light. Patrons streamed past, whispering, pointing, some laughing outright. The man who once sold illusions now stood to check bags and wave tickets. His humiliation was complete, and yet in his eyes there still lingered a stubborn spark. Pride, maybe, or desperation. I knew it wouldn't last. Pride is flammable, and I had one last match to strike. That evening, I unlocked the old safe in my apartment. The pouch was there, but deeper still lay the true relic. The deed to the gallery. Not the falsified copies Liam had slipped into that sham fund, but the original, notarized, untouched. Alongside it, a receipt for the schooner painting. Proof of its true history, long before Liam had claimed it as a centerpiece. I held those papers in my hands and felt the tide shift within me. This was more than vengeance. It was truth preserved, the keel beneath the waves. He thought he'd erased me, but I had outlasted him, just as sailors outlast storms. Still, my chest ached. I remembered him as a boy, sitting cross-legged on a gallery floor, tracing the outlines of ships with his finger. He had wanted to belong to that world, to be more than my son, and he could have been, had he chosen honesty over hunger. But hunger had consumed him, and now the only gift I had left to give was clarity. I slipped the papers into the pouch, fastened it tight, and placed the anchor pendant over it like a seal. Tomorrow, before the whole city, I would open it, not just for him, not just for me, but for the truth itself. The storm was nearly spent. but its last wave would be the tallest, the most merciless. And it was already rising. The invitation was not mine, yet I walked through those museum doors as if they'd been carved for me. Another gala, another unveiling. This one hastily arranged to restore confidence after the scandal. The irony was thick as varnish. Liam's name whispered with scorn, yet the institution still hoped spectacle could wipe clean the stain. The hall glittered again with chandeliers, but the crowd carried a sharper scent now. Curiosity mixed with bloodlust. They weren't here to admire art. They were here to watch a man unravel. And unravel he did. Liam stood near the entrance in that ill-fitting security blazer, forced to greet guests he once toasted with champagne. His smile was a mask cracked down the middle. Some shook his hand out of pity. Most ignored him entirely. The humiliation wasn't whispered this time. It was public, deliberate. I watched one collector, a man who once begged for Liam's favor, hand him a dripping umbrella with a sneer. My son accepted it, his jaw tight, his eyes glassy. I stayed in the shadows until the speeches began. The director droned about resilience, about trust, about the endurance of art. Every word was hollow, bouncing off marble walls. When he gestured toward a new acquisition, the curtain fell, revealing a canvas that shimmered under the lights. Applause swelled, but thinly, without conviction. That was my cue. I stepped forward, the pouch in my hand. A hush rolled over the hall. Recognition spread like wildfire. Cameras lifted. The critics leaned in, hungry. I have something to add. I said, voice steady, every syllable carrying the weight of tides. Liam froze at the back of the room, his eyes locked on the pouch, his lips forming a silent no. He shook his head like a man drowning, but the current was already too strong. I opened the velvet. Slowly, deliberately, I lifted the deed, the receipts, the provenance documents yellowed by years. Gasps cut through the silence. These are the truths you're denied, I said. The gallery he claimed as his own was never his to sell. The masterpiece he paraded was never his to own. I kept the originals, anchored, safe, while forgery dressed itself in silk. The director's face blanched. Critics surged forward, scribbling furiously. Flashbulbs stung the air. Liam stumbled into the aisle, voice cracking. He's lying. He forged those himself. But no one listened. His words fell flat, drowned by the roar of revelation. I let the anchor pendant slip from my collar, catching the light, gleaming like truth itself. This, I said, raising a high, is the key that unlocked the vault. Integrity, not illusion, is the ballast of any legacy. The crowd erupted. Not applause, not yet, but a storm of voices, of questions, of condemnation. Liam fell back against the wall. Cornered by the truth, he could no longer outrun. And in that moment, I knew the final wave had struck, but the tide had one last pull to make. The storm had burst wide, but I held the helm steady. The hall was chaos. Voices rising, cameras flashing, the documents spread across the podium like wreckage from a capsized ship. Collectors shouted questions. Critics circled like gulls over a carcass, and the director of the museum stood frozen, as though the very ground had betrayed him. And Liam, my son, he sagged against a marble wall, the blazer wrinkled, his face a map of ruin. His eyes darted, desperate, searching for a rope, for a hand, for anything that might pull him from the undertow. But there was no one left. His wife was gone. His allies had vanished. Even his pride had deserted him, leaking out through every crack in his trembling hands. He pushed forward suddenly, stumbling into the aisle. "It's not true," he cried, voice shrill. "He forged those papers. He's the liar. He's jealous. He's—" The director cut him off with a gesture sharp as a blade. "Enough." The word rang through the chamber, final as a gavel. Liam froze mid-sentence, his protest smothered by the silence that followed. The crowd no longer questioned who was guilty. They had decided. I stepped closer, the anchor pennant warm against my chest. For a moment, time slowed. I saw not the broken man before me, but the boy who once trailed me along the pier, eyes wide, asking why the sea always seemed endless. I remembered answering, because it shows us how small we are, and how strong we must be. Now he was small, and strength was nowhere in him. I raised a deed, my voice calm, steady, carrying over the crowd. The truth was never his enemy, only the lies he wrapped himself in. A man who trades honesty for ambition becomes a forgery of his own making. Gasps, nods, whispers. The cameras caught every word. Liam's knees buckled, and he sank onto a bench, facing his hands. The hall looked at him not with anger now, but with something worse. Pity. To be pitied in that world was to be erased. I gathered the papers, slipped them back into the pouch, and closed it with deliberate finality. The anchor pendant clinked softly against the clasp, sealing the storm's last chapter. But as I turned toward the exit, I felt the weight of more than triumph. The sea inside me was restless, stirred with currents of sorrow, of love twisted and broken. I had won, but victory tasted of salt and ash. Behind me, the hall buzzed with judgment, Liam's name dissolving into whispers. Ahead, the night waited cool and vast. One act remained, one truth yet to be spoken, not to the crowd, not to the critics, but to him alone. The reckoning was complete. The choice was still his, and I would give it to him, face to face, with no one left to save him. The crowd thinned, their hunger sated by scandal, their notebooks fat with ruin. I waited until the last flashbulb dimmed, until the director slipped away with the papers clutched like stolen treasure. Only then did I cross the marble floor toward him. Liam sat slumped on the bench, head in his hands, the security blazer wrinkled beyond repair. His breathing was ragged, his shoulders heaving. He didn't look up when my shoes echoed against the stone. Only when my shadow fell across him did he raise his eyes, red, hollow, furious and afraid all at once. "You wanted to destroy me," he spat, voice hoarse. "And you did." I sat beside him, the anchor pendant cold against my chest. For a moment, I said nothing. The silence stretched heavy as a storm lull. Then I spoke, low and steady. "I never wanted to destroy you. I wanted you to see, to understand. A man who builds his life on deceit isn't a man at all. He's driftwood, hollow, waterlogged, waiting to sink." He shook his head violently. "You humiliated me, took everything." I reached into the pouch one last time and pulled free the pendant's chain, letting the anchor dangle between us. Its brass caught the dim light, steady, unyielding. This, I said, kept me alive at sea, reminded me storms pass, but only if the keel holds. Tonight, I offer to you. He stared, uncomprehending. His lips trembled. "Why? After all this, why?" "Because vengeance without truth is nothing, and truth without choice is cruelty." I set the anchor in his hand, closed his fingers around it. "You can start again. Honest work, even if it's sweeping floors. Or you can cling to your lies and vanish as a forgery among forgeries. The choice is yours." His hand shook, the anchor rattling softly like a ship's bell in wind. For a long time he didn't speak. His eyes darted to the doorway, to the empty hall, to the shadows that no longer hid applause. Finally, his shoulders sagged and a sob escaped, a sound I hadn't heard since he was a child. I stood, looking down at him one last time. "A painting can fool the eye," I said, my voice carrying across the cavernous hall. "But it cannot fool the soul. Remember that." Then I turned, my steps echoing as I left him there, alone, anchor in hand, the weight of his choice pressing heavier than any crowd's judgment. Outside, the night was vast, cool, and merciful. The Hudson stretched dark and endless, the wind crisp with salt. I breathed it in, steady as a man at the wheel, charting one last course. The storm was over. The truth stood, and in its wake, silence at last. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the right.